Welcome into Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I am your host, Andrew Miller. Just me tonight, Christian Ballard, not able to make it. So kind of ends up being the same setup as we had last week, where early week show, me and Christian breaking down the Bulldogs. And if you missed the show earlier in the week, we talked about the Mississippi State defense. And last week, we talked about the Mississippi State offense. So we kind of have two full previews up for both sides of the ball when we talk about Mississippi State football. And here in the late week show, I've been doing some schedule breakdowns. So last week, I talked about Mississippi State's non-conference opponents. And this week, I'm going to be diving in talking about their SEC road games, which are some pretty important games, I would think, for this Bulldogs team. If they're going to take the step forward they want to this year, they're likely going to need to find some success in those road games, as those do look to be some of the more beatable opponents they have in conference play. So you start talking about how do you avoid going 0-8 in SEC play for a second straight season, you're probably talking about having to find a win on the road. You could pull an upset at home, and in fact, there's a game we're going to talk about here just in a second that is a home game that will be interesting for Mississippi State, where you're certainly going to be hoping they can pull a big upset. But considering that those home opponents are some of the better teams they're going to have on the schedule, there's no doubt your best chance of finding wins in SEC play will come on the road. So we're going to dive into those opponents today. Those opponents being Texas A&M, Florida, Arkansas, and Missouri. So I got full breakdowns for all of those teams coming later on. But I had to start off with a different topic to open up today's show, and it's kind of fitting here as I've got the hat on. I've got the interlocking MSU hat here on tonight's show. I know I've been going with the Script State or my random Buffalo hat on a lot of these shows, but it felt fitting to wear the interlocking tonight because we did get news. Mississippi State football officially bringing back the interlocking MSU logo for at least one game. If you are someone who follows Mississippi State Twitter at all on social media, as I'm going to try to adjust my camera a little bit here, you know this is something fans have been clamoring for quite some time now, and clamoring quite loudly for that change. Obviously, it was a logo that the program used for the mid-'90s into the early 2000s, and there was so much excitement during that time, a lot of really good MSU teams, and it was something that people identified MSU football with for a nice stretch there in the late 90s, early 2000s. But logo goes away after 2003. We go 20 years without it being used. The state changes some of their branding. Obviously, for the longest time, there was the talk that Nike owned the logo, which was kind of interesting, how that worked out. It seemed like very typical MSU that their former athletics apparel provider had the rights to their logo, and that's why State couldn't use it once they went to Russell Athletic and eventually Adidas. We come to find out 2 years ago that that's not the case, and that Mississippi State was able to use the interlocking logo all along. They break it out in 2023 as a throwback uniform to honor the 1998 team. Uniform that was a huge hit with the fan base, a huge hit with a lot of people in college football media, and there was a lot of excitement. And they wore it that one game, sold a bunch of gear and apparel that had that logo on it for that short period of time, and then that was kind of it. And it went away, and we didn't see it at all last year, and MSU really hasn't even used it as a part of their branding other than occasionally seeing a football coach wearing the logo at practices. Fans have been begging loudly to see that logo return and be made the full-time look. And if we have learned anything about Zach Selman's tenure as athletic director here in Starkville, it's that he is going to listen to State fans over what they are most interested in when it comes to improving fan experience. And logos and uniforms are a part of that. They kind of already did that with the Script State logo that we've seen become the main athletics logo here in these last few seasons. It is currently the logo that is on the football helmet. But you give people a taste of the interlocking, which again is a logo that a large percentage of your fan base beloves, both those who got to live during that period and got to watch those teams, and those who just, even if they weren't around for that time, just really like the look of it and want to see it continue. You gave people a taste of that, and it kind of becomes a question of, well, when is this thing going to be made full-time? Are you going to bring this thing back? You can't give it to us one game, and then we never see it again. And there's been, again, quite the push on social media to see it come back. And State is bringing it back. I know that was quite the preamble to get into what's actually happening here, but if you're listening to the show, you probably are aware of what's happened. Mississippi State will be wearing the interlocking MSU on a white helmet for their September 27th game against Tennessee. They are going to be honoring the 2000 Snow Bowl team, Snow Bowl being a legendary game that the Bulldogs played back in that 2000 Independence Bowl on a random snowy night in Shreveport, Louisiana. State won 43-41 in overtime against Texas A&M while wearing all white uniforms with white helmets. So they're going to be doing a whiteout game against Tennessee. They're going to be breaking out all white uniforms. Hopefully you get all white in the stands, but you're also getting that interlocking MSU logo on the helmet. And obviously fan base is rejoicing over that news. Whether or not it becomes the full-time logo, at this point, I kind of think it's probably going to happen. If we're just being honest, it's going to be hard, I think, for them to tease that look and then once again do, all right, here's one game and then not use it again. And that's not to say that I think the script state would just go away. I would imagine there'd be they're probably going to wear it the first few games of the season, I would think. But once they break out the interlocking logo, it's going to be really hard for them to go back, and you will probably see it get put on maroon helmets as well. It'd just be made the main logo that State uses for football, at least for the remainder of the season. And then I would imagine going forward. Again, that's speculation. I don't know that for sure, but I think it's kind of one of those things where it's hard to go back after you break it out. So that clamoring worked, right? And you're going to get that logo, and it should be a really good look and should create a really fun atmosphere that night help create a fun atmosphere that night against Tennessee, which is going to be a huge game for Mississippi State in terms of their opportunities. I know a few episodes ago, I talked about the top 5 most important games of the season for Mississippi State. I think that Tennessee game is one of the 5 most important of the season, given the opportunity that awaits Jeff Levy's program when the Volunteers come to Starkville. So, yeah, that's going to be an absolute huge game. And to add that you are honoring a team that a lot of fans loved, you're going to be wearing a logo that a lot of fans loved. Should be a really, really cool night, and hopefully Mississippi State can deliver an upset to make it all the worthwhile. But yeah, again, I tend to think we're probably going to see this logo continue on as the full-time look for the Bulldogs going forward. Also add, that's not the only bit of pseudo-uniform news. Kind of was already broken that State's going to do a blackout game in Week 2 against Arizona State on September 6th. I know my guy Hail State Unis kind of hinted a little bit while back that a State has not worn a black uniform in quite some time, and that it was like, it's interesting. We might see that again. And some of the replies to that tweet sort of suggested like he knew something, and it appears he knew something because Brad Crawford of 247 Sports or CBS Sports, he's 247 and CBS, they're all together. He already put out State's going to have a blackout game against Arizona State. You can kind of read between the lines here. Mississippi State football is probably going to be wearing a black uniform when Arizona State comes to town, and that'll be fun to watch. I like the blackout looks personally. I know they're kind of controversial for the fan base. There's this narrative that when State wears black, they lose, and that's just not accurate. They actually have done pretty well while wearing the black uniforms in recent years, and I think it's a good look. So I'm excited to see what that will look like, because we don't know the design on that. Will we get the interlocking MSU on a black helmet? I don't know. That'd be really cool, but we'll see what State does. I think that's going to do it for the uniform news as we get to the main part of the show. Do want to remind you, if you are new here, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and help us continue to grow this thing. To turn the notifications on so that you can know when we go live. I kind of sprung this live onto people a little bit out of nowhere because I didn't really broadcast it ahead of time the way I normally would have because I was just behind on stuff today. But yeah, if you hit that bell, you'll see, hey, we're going live here on Mississippi State Live for Voice of College Football. You can join in. Love to have you guys be a part of the channel. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, notifications, all that great stuff. Share, keep this channel growing. We really appreciate it. So we want to talk about Mississippi State's road SEC games for the upcoming season. And these are, again, as I kind of mentioned early in the show, some really, really big games for the Bulldogs. These are games that when you talk about State's opportunities to find wins in conference play, these are frankly their best chances that they're going to have because it's coming against teams that are the more beatable opponents on the schedule. When you talk about Arkansas, right, who's considered one of the bottom teams in the SEC going into the year, Missouri team that's got a lot of questions with the pieces that they lost from a season ago, although as we'll talk about the Tigers defensively, they could be in really good shape. I think Texas A&M, as we'll get to here in just a second, they're going to be the first team we break down. I actually am pretty high on the Aggies this year, but obviously that's an A&M program that we kind of see year after year. It's never a sure thing that they're just going to be great, right? The odds have typically been a lot of mediocrity in Aggie land. So what does that team look like? And then a Florida team where there's a lot of excitement over the potential based on the way that they closed last season, but are they the team we saw at the end of last year, or are they the team that was struggling earlier in the year? Add in, are they really going to be able to take a step forward this year, given some of the injury concerns that we're already seeing with the Gators here throughout camp? Now, if you're a fan of any one of those teams, what you're going to say is all of those teams beat Mississippi State last year and for the most part beat them handedly, and that's fair. They did. But we also believe Mississippi State's going to be a better football team this year. And those were games, against Florida, State wasted several opportunities down in the red zone that came back to bite them. They could have potentially found a way to win that game if not for some mistakes that they made and some turnovers in that game. The Texas A&M game, they had some opportunities. They were very much in that game in the second half and just kind of let it get away from them with some mistakes. The Arkansas game, I know Arkansas really moved the ball at will. I mean, they put up 59 points. Of course they did. But State turned the ball over and took too many negative plays that prevented them from being able to ultimately put enough points on the board to have a chance. And then against Missouri, that was a game where State had every opportunity within about the first 5 minutes of the game to not only come out and punch Mizzou in the mouth, but really seize control. And they just failed to do so, and ultimately Missouri gets up big. But then in the second half, State had opportunities. They had a chance to get back into the game and couldn't quite do it. So, yes, we are talking about teams that beat Mississippi State by multiple scores last year. But for at least a couple of them, it's possible they're not going to be quite as good as they were a year ago. There's also the possibility Mississippi State could be improved enough to this time have a chance. So those are big games for the Bulldogs on this schedule. And to start off, we want to talk about Texas A&M because that is a game. And let me get State's schedule here in front of me so I can make sure I'm talking about where it falls on the schedule. State will travel to Texas A&M to open up the month of October. October 4th, we'll head to Aggie Land. And as I kind of alluded to here just a second ago, I'm pretty high on Texas A&M. I think this Aggies team is going to be pretty strong this season. I really like what they have. And I think Mike Elko is bringing steadiness to that program that they needed. With Jimbo Fisher and even with Kevin Sumlin, there was quite a bit of flash, right? You saw the recruiting prowess and the talent that was coming in, and okay, we're building up this type of roster with the money that's coming into the program to be able to compete at the SEC level. And they just continually seemed to get in their own way. And I think with Elko, it was much more of we're just here to play football, right? We're just here to sort of get back to basics and do what this program is. I was about to say do what this program is supposed to do. What they're supposed to do is typically do what they do, which is go 8-4. But I think there was a thought process of let's just get back to basics and just build around being a good, solid football team. And I thought they did that pretty well last year. And I know when it's all said and done, they went 8-4. They are, in fact, Texas 8-4. But look, they went into the last week of the season with a chance to go to Atlanta against Texas. And they never looked like just a terrible team throughout the season. They were very much in games. They were competitive. And they just felt like a more serious operation. It was like, yeah, they went 8-4, but it feels like things are trending in the proper direction. And now they go into 2025 season with a lot of experience back on both sides of the ball. And I think there is a thought that this Texas A&M team can genuinely jump up and compete within the SEC. So let's talk about that a little bit. And we'll start with the offense. And I think where you have to start is that offensively, they are loaded up front. They bring back their entire starting offensive line, and those are guys that have got some beef. Their average size on the O-line is 6'6", 333 pounds. They are massive, and they have got maulers. And that's good because they are going to want to run the crap out of the ball with the guys they have in the backfield. They're loaded at running back. Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels both return after combining for over 1,400 yards and 18 touchdowns a year ago. Reuben Owens is a guy who comes back who 2 seasons ago was a part of that same rotation and, got injured early last year to get him back. That's as good of a trio of backs as you're ultimately going to have in the country. They've got a really good group in the backfield. Then you add in at the quarterback position, Marcel Reed, who is a really good threat with his legs. Last season ran for 543 yards and 7 touchdowns. And, you look at the Texas A&M game where they come back in the second half of that one, they basically did it entirely on the ground, and they did it almost entirely with the quarterback run game. This is a team that's going to run the ball and run it really effectively, which is really intriguing when you consider their offensive coordinator and Colin Klein, who's a guy that both as a player and then also you look at his time as an offensive coordinator at Kansas State, that's a guy that knows how to draw up a spread run game, a power spread run game. And they have got the horses to do that with what they've got on the offensive line, what they've got a running back and a quarterback. The question kind of becomes from a passing game standpoint, what are they going to be able to be? Because Marcel Reed was pretty inconsistent last year. 61%, which is fine, but 1,864 yards, 15 touchdowns to 6 picks, 7.8 yards per attempt. Kind of just mediocre all the way around. He had some good moments, had some bad moments. He's a guy that can very much be a playmaker and can make some big plays for the Aggies. But in terms of being a guy that consistently want to ask you to throw the football, that's kind of a concern with him. And part of the concern there is that from a receiving core standpoint, do they have the dudes for that? Now, they do. I don't know if they have the dudes to run a true drop back style pass game. They got the dudes, though, to have some exciting playmakers. And the big name to know stepping in, Kevin Concepcion, over the last 2 years at NC State, this is a guy who caught 124 passes for just under 1,300 yards and 16 total touchdowns. Really dangerous receiver out of the slot, a guy who's just deadly in space, a guy who can get involved in the run game. And when I get involved in the run game, I don't just mean we'll get him the ball in a jet sweep because we want to get him the ball quickly in space, get him around the edge. NC State would line him up at running back and let him run between the tackles. And again, last 2 years, 356 rush yards with a pair of touchdowns. He is a really dangerous playmaker, and he is someone that I think A&M is going to want to get involved in a lot of interesting ways. And again, I talked about Colin Klein and the run game. Kevin Concepcion stepping in as a piece to that, I am very intrigued to see how they make use of him within their offense. I think this is a team from a run game standpoint will be super exciting. And then Concepcion's also a guy that even if he is your go-to, the one guy in the receiving corps you can really rely on, he's a dangerous enough player they can use him that way. They also added a guy Mississippi State fans are going to be very familiar with, Mario Craver, who, as State fans know, the story with him is speed. Last year, 21.6 yards per catch. It very much, we're going to take a deep shot to this guy a couple times a game, and that's kind of all we're going to do to him or do with him. But he's going to be pretty effective in that because he has the speed to get behind the defense, can be a big play receiver down the field. In terms of him being more of an every down player, we'll see if he grows into that role. One of the things with him is that obviously he is a smaller player. So when you start talking about using him on the outside, or really it's not even using him on the outside, using him as a down by down receiver, you're a little bit more limited to the short intermediate part of the short part of the field as opposed to more intricate routes. But I say more intricate routes. What I mean is you're not going to be asking him, I think, to run a full route tree. It would be kind of working underneath, or how he was used at Mississippi State is just run vertical, run fast, because it doesn't matter that you're not very tall. You can just get deep down the field. I will say, though, that if that's the only way they're going to use him as a deep threat, I think that can work well. You also bring in Amari Niblack at tight end, who last year at Texas, which, that's an interesting transfer right there, going from Texas A&M, didn't make much of an impact, but 2 seasons ago at Alabama was productive as a receiving threat at tight end. I think this is a team, as I keep talking about, they're going to be able to run the ball really well with, again, what they got up front, what they have at running back, Marcel Reed's ability as a runner, getting Kevin Concepcion involved. And if you just force feed him touches as the one primary pass catcher, he can make it happen. But again, Niblack's the guy they can get involved. And then if you want to just, once defenses come up on all of that, take a shot downfield to Craver, I think that's an offense that could be pretty effective. I don't know if they get into situations where they're having to actually sit back and throw the football, if they can do it well, because one, I do think they would need a few other types of receivers on the roster. Two, I just don't know that Marcel Reed is a guy who's going to be able to handle that. But also, how often are they going to get in those spots? They're going to be able to run the ball pretty effectively, that they're not going to have to worry about getting in those types of spots. Moving over to the defense, this is a unit that came in with a ton of hype last year and didn't fully deliver upon that. It was still fine, but down the stretch kind of had some iffy performances and were not the dominant group I think they were expected to be. And if you look at who they're losing up front, you would think, okay, they already weren't as good as we thought, and now they're losing these big names. That could be trouble. When you talk about Nick Scorden at defensive end, Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turnovers, your other guys up front, as well as a few other contributors. From a talent perspective, they are definitely losing a lot. But that's a group that was not as dominant as they were expected to be going into the year. They really didn't get the pass rush that I think a lot of people were hoping for. So from a talent standpoint, are they going to be as strong this year? Probably not. But could they match last year's production or even be a little bit more productive? That is possible. I don't know if you're going to see a true drop in terms of the performance up front. They have a starting defensive tackle back in Albert Regis and a productive defensive end, Cassius Howell, who last year had 4 sacks and 8 quarterback hurries as a backup. So you have a couple pieces right there already to work with. Florida defensive end TJ Searcy and Iowa State defensive tackle Tyler Ungidam are 2 guys that are both expected to be really good contributors. I think this is probably a solid starting defensive line. Are they going to be as deep as they were? No. And in terms of top-end talent, the ceiling was higher a year ago with the guys they had, but as I've talked about, they didn't hit that ceiling. So can you at least match what you did last year? Probably. And again, they might be a little bit more productive. The back 7 has a whole lot of experience. Top 6 tacklers in terms of linebackers and defensive backs all return. Torian York and Scooby Williams are a good linebacker duo. Now, the secondary was pretty hit or miss last year. They had some games where they just had some rough outings. But they're a lot older this year. Got a lot more experience. You had a lot of guys who were younger a year ago that had to play. All the starters are back. And then Will Lee at corner is a preseason All-SEC type guy. Like, that's a really good piece for them at cornerback. So a lot of experience, high-level corner on the outside. They're probably taking a step forward there. All the makings are there for this to be a really good defense. So I'm pretty high on what Texas A&M is able to do. And then you add in Mike Elko taking over play calling. So this could be a defense that takes a nice step forward. And I think this is going to be a pretty good team. Biggest strength when we talk about the Aggies, it's that run game. This is going to be one of the best run games in the country. And I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. I put this out on Twitter the other night. I think I'm more excited to watch this offense than almost any other offense in the country, which if you followed me for a long time, that kind of goes against my brand being sort of an air raid type guy. But I also appreciate a good power, like spread type offense. I think those are a lot of fun to see, especially a guy like Colin Klein and the way they're going to get the quarterback involved in the run game. What some of the unique formations they'll be able to get into, some of the motion stuff they'll do. I think that'll be a whole lot of fun to watch. And yeah, that run game is going to give them a chance against most every team that they play. From a weakness, what is the consistency from the passing game? So again, you've got some interesting weapons in that receiving core. Do you have the guys that you can consistently line up? And if you have to get into passing situations, do you have the bodies for that? And the bigger thing is, can Marcel Reed really handle that? I don't know about that. I will say the ceiling of the defense is probably, again, not as high as it was a year ago. And again, that goes back to the defensive line, not having the same players up front in terms of overall talent level. This may be a good defense or even a really good defense. Can they be a dominant group? That may be limited by the talent that they have. But I think they're going to be pretty good. And I think this is a team that's going to have a lot of success. And when we talk about how does Mississippi State match up, I think this is a tough matchup for the Bulldogs. As much as I think State's defensive line is going to be better this year, the teams that are going to be really strong in the trenches and have the really strong run games do scare me. Because I just think it's unrealistic to ask State to take that big of a step forward defensively that you're to a point. It's one thing to talk about getting just run over. But in terms of being good enough that teams are not able to run the ball pretty effectively against you, that, again, are built to run the ball really well, that might be a bit of a leap. And I think A&M again, as I just described, I think they're going to have the edge there. And then the other side of the ball, I mean, you got some speedy pass catchers that Howard State's guys going to be able to match up one-on-one. A&M's defense probably just still has a talent edge overall. Yeah, I just think this is going to be a bit of a tough matchup for Mississippi State playing in College Station. This one's probably I'm probably marking this one up as a loss, just to be honest here. I think A&M's going to be really good, and I do think Elko has that thing trending in the right direction. I think it's going to be tough for the Bulldogs. Next game for State that'll be on the road will actually be the next game they play. They will take a bye. And then October 18th, they're going to go to Florida. And as I talked about a little bit earlier, this is a game for State a year ago that at the time, I mean, both programs were in a pretty rough spot. State's coming off a blowout loss to Toledo. Florida, I think, was off to a 1-2 start. They had lost to Texas A&M. They had gotten embarrassed by Miami. A lot of memes and jokes about this being a disgusting game. Like, why on earth would you admit you're watching Florida versus Mississippi State? Ended up being a pretty normal college football game, but a game where State's defense was horrendous, and they made Graham Mertz look incredible, and DJ Lagway, when he got in, made them pay. And it's a game where State offensively played one of their better games of the year, and that they, in fact, probably was their best game of the year in terms of complete performance. They moved the ball pretty well much of the day. Blake Shapen had a good bit of success when he was in. The run game was very effective for the first time this season. And they gave themselves opportunities, with the problem being that they did not convert when they got into the red zone. When they had, and they also turned the ball over a little bit too much, but when they had to be able to go and put points on the board to keep pace with what Florida was doing, they fell short. But offensively, overall, it was a game that they could take from and build off of. Fortunately for them, it's a game that Blake Shapen gets hurt, and building off of it became a bit of a problem. This Florida team, there's a lot of excitement. They're a preseason top 15 team going into the year, and that's because they really started to turn things around as the season went along, which at this time last year just didn't seem possible. When we were talking about the schedule, we were talking about some of the issues, but I will say I was higher on Florida last year than a lot of people. Not to toot my own horn too much here, but I did think that was a Florida team that was probably better than they were getting credit for. It took them some time to get there, but once they did, you get big wins late in the season against Ole Miss and LSU. They go to a bowl game, ends up being a solid season for Billy Napier, and now there's some momentum for the program. And they go into 2025 with a lot of experience back, both sides of the ball, some really talented players at key positions, and obviously a ton of excitement around who they got at quarterback. So starting there with the offense, it's all eyes on DJ Lagway, right? Last year's a true freshman, one of the most hype recruits in the country. He showed why he's this guy that everyone's so excited about, right? Big physical player, huge arm, talented passer, can also be a really effective runner. But you also saw the freshman mistakes, right? He completed less than 60% of his passes, 12 touchdowns, just 9 interceptions, took some sacks that he probably shouldn't have, which is why, for a guy who can run well, his rushing numbers were not anything to get excited about. But he hit big plays. He was about 10 yards per attempt, which is really good. So when he did hit on his throws, he was hitting downfield, and they were hitting big plays in the passing game. If this guy takes a year 2 leap, you're talking about a quarterback who could be one of the nation's best. The question is health. He missed the spring. So far through camp, I think it's sort of been hit or miss. Billy Napier got a question about if the season started today, would he be out there? And Napier answers, well, the season doesn't start today, which is not the type of answer that you want to be given when you're talking about the quarterback who's got to lead your offense. And, in terms of a backup situation, I don't think they're in a great one. They got a real concern there. I think most likely he'll be healthy. He'll be ready to go. But if Lagway's down, that's a big knock on what they're going to be able to do offensively. Now, whether Lagway's healthy or not, probably going to be able to run the football pretty effectively. The offensive line will be strong. 4 starters back. Left tackle Austin Barber and center Jake Slaughter are both all SEC guys. This is the best group that Billy has had there. And they've got good talent at running back. They did lose Montrell Johnson, but Jaden Baugh, who's a guy that there's a lot of preseason hype around, and then Jacoby Jackson combined for over 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns last season. They got talent at running back. They got a strong offensive line. They run an offense that is built around that wide zone run game. they're going to be able to run the football and lean on that for their offense, even if you've got some concerns about what DJ Lagway is able to do from a health standpoint. They also have questions, though, at receiver, and these questions have kind of gotten louder. So you're losing Elijah Badger and Chamir Dike, who were their top two guys a year ago. Now, a lot of thought of the pieces coming back in the receiving corps. Some of the guys they're adding in, they should still be in really good shape. Eugene Wilson III, 2 seasons ago, had a really nice year as a freshman, was impressive the first few games of last season. He gets hurt, was done for the year, but they're getting him back. Aiden Mizell is a guy who's returning, who did some nice things for them. They added a 5-star freshman in Dallas Wilson, who they're very excited about. So you're looking, it's like, okay, they got talent in the receiving corps. These are guys who are going to be able to come in and step in. They add J. Michael Sturdivant from Cal or from UCLA. He was at Cal in 2022 and had a big year, kind of declined the last 2 years playing at UCLA. But there's thought, okay, stepping into a better situation, can he take a step forward? The problem is the first 3 guys I talked about, Wilson III, Mizell, and Dallas Wilson, they're all hurt right now. They're all out. Or at least they were as of last night. Those are big losses. Now, again, are those guys going to be back for the season? How long are they going to be out? We don't know. But they're not getting reps. And you're talking about breaking in guys who probably need to get reps as you head into the season. That concerns me a lot when we talk about Florida. If that passing game, if you got inconsistent quarterback because Lagway is hurt, because again, he also has to, even if Lagway is able to play, you need him out there being able to practice and take a step forward. And he already missed the spring. And now you're talking about receivers being out. That gives me some pause about what Florida's going to be able to do, especially early in the season. Now, they don't play State early in the season. That's midway point of the year. So from a Mississippi State standpoint, how much is that is going to help you? I mean, I don't know if those guys are hurt. That changes things. But in terms of those guys being able to build up and get better and better for their early year slate, that's a bit of a concern. So the ceiling is high for the Florida offense. And again, the floor is probably pretty high as well based on the fact that they've got such a strong offensive line. That's a good starting point. They can make something happen. But if we're talking about Florida being a team that takes that next step and ascends to being a playoff contender, they're going to need a healthy DJ Lagway. They're going to need health in that receiving corps. If they don't get those things, it could be iffy. Over on the defensive side of the ball, they got a lot better last year once Ron Roberts took over full-time as the play caller. Really were kind of a bend-don't-break type unit, held up in the red zone, 4 turnovers. That was what they gave up a lot of yards, sometimes gave up a lot of points, but they kind of did enough. Really, the Mississippi State game is a prime example of that. State moved the ball effectively. State got stopped a couple times in the red zone. State turned the football over. You see how the game played out. There's thoughts this could be a really nice defense. The defensive line looks like it could be really nasty. Defensive end, Tyreek Sapp, defensive tackle, Caleb Banks, and edge, George Gums. Those are guys who last year combined for 16.5 sacks, 28 tackles for loss, of 15 quarterback hurries. That's as good a group as you're going to ask for. Now we talk about injuries. Caleb Banks is hurt right now. Again, another big concern for Florida. It is the health. That is the issue with this team. What is Caleb's status going to be going forward? I don't know. But this gets more and more concerning the more we talk about Florida, the guys that they could be losing. If he's healthy out there, you got a really good player at defensive tackle. And you're talking about a really, really strong defensive end. Defensive line. But without him, you take a little bit of a knock, especially because you're already losing a couple of guys along the defensive interior as well. If healthy, though, we're talking about a really, really strong defensive line, which is going to set the ceiling for the defense. Really set the floor for the defense. They lost a few guys at linebacker, but I know they like the guys in the room, and they think they've probably improved the talent there. Good experience in the secondary. They had to play a lot of younger guys last year because of some injuries, and you got a lot of those guys back. Sharif Denton at nickel's a good player. They got a good safety duo between Jordan Castell and Bryce Thornton. And when healthy, Devin Moore has been a really good corner for them. Health, again, that's the theme when we talk about Florida, is health has been an issue. But if they're able to be healthier on the back end this year, you're looking at a really strong defense overall. Biggest strength would be the lines of scrimmage. With what you've got on the offensive and defensive lines, again, we keep talking about health, but you need Caleb Banks healthy. But assuming that's healthy, I mean, your offensive defensive lines in Gainesville, those are 2 really strong units, and that's going to, again, set a high floor for what this team is able to be this coming season. The biggest weakness right now is health. Now, I specified initially health on offense because of Lagway and the receivers, but you add in Caleb Banks on defense. They need to get healthy. If healthy, this team can be really good. If healthy, this team can compete for the playoff. If they're not, they're taking a step back. Talk about the matchup for Mississippi State, and I'll just assume a healthy Florida here. Kind of similar to what I talked about with A&M. I would worry about State's ability to hold up their defensive line against Florida's offensive line. I feel like Florida will probably be able to run the ball pretty effectively. And on the other side, I think State's offensive line is going to be better this year. I also think Florida's defensive line could be really, really good, and that would concern me in this matchup. Now, I do think it's worth noting Jeff Lebby has done a good job scheming against Ron Roberts before. He's seen him 2 previous times. Both times they were able to put a lot of points on, put up a lot of yards. And really, both times you felt like the offense probably did enough under normal circumstances, and with the defenses giving up a lot of points. But in both occasions, the offense, there was against when he was at Oklahoma playing Baylor with Ron Roberts as the DC, they turned the ball over too many times. This year for Mississippi State, it was more like the red zone, getting and failing to convert in the red zone. Lebby's done a good job getting yards against Roberts. Can he finish those drives out and get points on the board? That's going to be big, which, to be fair, part of what defending this offense tends to be is recognizing that bend don't break is probably the best way for you to play. So it kind of goes into the game plan a little bit. But overall, Lebby has done a good job of being able to move the ball against Ron Roberts' coach defenses. We'll see if that leads to more points this year. But again, a healthy Florida team is probably going to be a really good team this season. Let's talk about the Hogs. Arkansas. Mississippi State will travel to Fayetteville November 1st. So open up the close of the season. I think this is the game, really kind of similar to the way it was last year, that a lot of people have circled and saying, okay, if Mississippi State's going to find an SEC win, where it's going to come, the Arkansas game is what a lot of people are going to point to. Now, it's ironic considering the Hogs put 59 on State in Starkville a year ago. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, State could have put more points up in that game and made it look a little bit more respectable, if not for some of the turnovers that they committed in that game and some wasted opportunities. But nonetheless, it was a 59-25 blowout win for Arkansas. How does that translate to year 2 when you're going to Fayetteville? It may not be just a straight transition over. Arkansas last year, they go to a bowl game. I think it was 7-6, a solid season considering the expectations, but it was not enough to generate excitement. And now they go into this year. They lost a bunch on both sides of the ball. There's just not a lot of buzz. Sam Pittman's on one of the hottest seats in America. There's few coaches that a fan base is more PO'd with right now than Arkansas fans are with Sam Pittman. There's just not a lot of excitement here. So getting to talk about the team a little bit, offensively, it's year 2 for Taylor Green playing for Bobby Petrino. I think a lot of us expected Bobby Petrino to throw a coup and find a way to unseat Pittman. He might still be working on that. Maybe he was in for more of a long game. But right now he goes into year 2 as the OC. And Taylor Green last year was solid. Over 3,000 yards passing. Completed around 60% of his passes. Not a terrible yards per attempt, although didn't jump off the page. 8.3 yards per attempt, actually really solid. 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So turned the ball over a little bit too much. Took a lot of sacks. That was kind of the issue with him as well. But he was very effective as a rusher. 600 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground. It was a solid season. Didn't blow me away, but it was a solid year. And you saw him do some good things as a passer. And I do think that if he takes the next step, we could be talking about him having a big year. And Bobby Petrino is one of those guys that does tend to run an offensive system. I know as I'm shuffling around here. That does ask a lot on its quarterbacks. And he's a little bit more demanding. He's not going to run one of these things where he's just scheming it up for his QBs all day long. So putting more pressure on his QB, that does mean stepping into year 2, you tend to see guys take a nice little jump. And a lot of the quarterbacks Petrino has coached previously, that's what you see. And I think there's hope that Taylor Green for them has taken that next step. Part of the problem, though, is going to be who he's throwing to. Every meaningful pass catcher is gone. I think quite literally the top 8 receivers from a year ago are no longer in Fayetteville. And they didn't really bring in a lot of proven studs in the portal to step in and replace them. Omega Blake comes from Charlotte. He's a fun downfield threat. He started his career at South Carolina, had a few flash plays, but didn't really become part of the rotation, which they had some really good receivers ahead of him on that team. Goes to Charlotte last year. it was over 700 yards, over 30 catches, averaged nearly 25 yards a catch with 9 touchdowns. Very much I'm going to hit a big play down the field or probably not do that much. In a way, a little bit of a bigger Mario Craver, a more productive Mario Craver. But he could be a fun downfield receiving threat within this system. I do like that addition. The other guys they added are kind of like smaller slot type receivers who are more just kind of dangerous in space. They've already lost one of them for the year, and Ismail Cisse, who came over from Stanford. They got a couple others who could be solid players for them, but in terms of guys that you think are like traditional good receivers, they don't have a lot of proven guys. I know there's some young guys on the roster that they like. They got big questions here at receiver. I do like a tight end they added from Montana State, Rohan Jones, last year, over 400 yards and 9 touchdowns for the Bobcats. Could be a fun receiving threat for them. I think there's a way they could make this offense work, as I'll get to here in a sec, but Petrino wants to run a really strong passing attack. He wants to do a lot at the drop back pass game. That requires a lot from your quarterback, obviously, but it requires a lot from your receivers as well. You need to have receivers who are able to do a variety of things, and you kind of wonder, does Arkansas have the receiving talent to do that? Now, does that mean that Petrino is going to try to force something? If it's not there, no. But I do wonder if they're going to have the ability to really do what they would like to offensively. Now, the good news, the running game should be strong. You got some good running backs. Braylon Russell turns. He obviously ran all over Mississippi State a year ago. And then New Mexico State's Mike Washington was a productive player who transfers up. And they've got a couple other backs they like. Obviously, Taylor Green, over 600 yards, 8 touchdowns, so you're going to get him involved. And then from an offensive line standpoint, they should be better. That's a group that last year was pretty It was not as good as they were supposed to be, particularly in pass protection. They added some talented transfers. They were able to move some guys they want. Fernando Carmona, who was sort of their big tackle addition that they brought in last year and was an all-SEC player, they're moving him to guard because they think it's going to better suit him there. And kind of similar to what we talked about with Mississippi State and Albert Reese, that because of the pieces State added in the portal, a guy like Albert Reese can move to guard where he can probably be a better player. Sort of talking about the same thing with Carmona at Arkansas. Some of the guys they added in. They brought a 3-year starter over from Georgia Tech, highly touted transfer from Oregon, who was a big-time recruit, I think either last year or the year before, who's stepping in, as well as a few experienced guys back. This should be a better Arkansas offensive line. So if they're stronger up front, with what they have at running back, Taylor Green, they should be able to run the football well. If the offense is them just running the ball a lot and then taking shots downfield to Omega Blake with occasionally dumping it off to some of the other receivers in space, they got something they can work with. Can they be the consistent type of offense they're going to have to be successful? I don't know. And part of the reason they're going to have to be consistently successful is I have big questions about what Arkansas is able to do on the defensive side of the ball. Defensive line's taking a huge hit there. And really the defense as a whole is losing a lot, but defensive line specifically, you had Landon Jackson, Eric Gregory, as well as a few other guys who were just really big-time pieces on that defensive line a year ago. They're all gone. Now, they do still have a starter back, a defensive tackle, and Cameron Ball, who's a good player. Other than that, you had a lot of questions. They bring in FCS transfer David Oke from Abilene Christian. He was very productive. I think it was 9.5 tackles for loss a season ago. Phillip Lee, as an edge rusher from Troy, had solid production over the last few years as a pass rusher. But relying on some young guys, relying on, again, several transfers who, outside of Oke, haven't really had big-time numbers previously. They got a lot of questions along that defensive line. And last year, defensive line was kind of the one thing that kept them going as a defense throughout the year is they were strong enough up front that they could lean on that. Do they have that this year? I have my doubts about it. Now, linebacker room should be good. Xavier Story and Steven Dix are a good duo. They're a good duo who performed well for Arkansas last year, very productive. Secondary is a big question mark. They lose a lot of guys, but they were bad a year ago. So it's kind of like, all right, how significant are those losses when they were not a good secondary last season? And they do have a lot of guys back who did play for what it's worth because they dealt with a lot of injuries a season ago. A lot of guys got reps. A lot of guys got starts. So they have some pieces there. But the problem is there's not a single proven name on the back end of that defense. It's not a single guy that you can say, like, we know that guy is going to be a high-level player for them. I like defense coordinator Travis Williams. I think he's honestly done a pretty good job there. I think this defense is probably going to struggle quite a bit. When I talk about Arkansas The strength could be linebacker, just in terms of position, which I say that his defense struggles. I think the linebacker could be good, but I just don't know what else they have defensively. And for the team as a whole, run game probably looks like it's going to be solid, something they can build around. The weakness, wide receiver. They just do not have I like Omega Blake, but they don't have a proven every down type player. But we could be talking about the defense as a whole. Outside of linebacker, we don't know what they got at defensive line. We don't know what they have on the back end of the defense, and those things concern me quite a bit when we talk about what they're able to be. In terms of the matchup, once again, this is a team I think is going to be able to run the football well. Now, I don't think they're going to be a dominant offensive line like Texas A&M and Florida can be. So could State match up a little bit better? Probably. But they're still going to be able to run the ball well. So I don't think they're going to gash State the way they did a year ago, where they were just able to run the ball at will and State looked horrendous. State looked horrendous in a lot of games, but this is the one that probably looked – I was going to say this is the one that looked the worst. Arizona State looked the worst. This is probably the second worst performance in terms of run defense and what we saw from the Bulldogs. It won't be that bad, but I think Arkansas will probably be able to run the ball. Where I do think it's different is I think State could have a day offensively here. State had opportunities last year against Arkansas, and as I keep talking about, they turned the ball over too many times. Some of it was also that Arkansas defensive line gave State's offensive line a lot of problems, and they were able to get a lot of pressure, and you had some big negative plays that ultimately came back to bite you. But, I've got questions about what this Arkansas defense is going to be able to be. I think State's offense can put points on the board here. So you've got a chance if you're Mississippi State in this one. And I'm curious, for Arkansas, I should have already had this up as I'm flipping through my Phil Steele magazine. From a scheduling standpoint, this is at the end of a 4-game stretch for Arkansas where they go at Tennessee, and then it's 3 straight home games, Texas A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State. They are playing A&M in Fayetteville this year. They're not in Jerry World. This is after they already started the season. They're going to have games against Ole Miss and Notre Dame. They could be in a rough spot at this point. And they got a bye week after Mississippi State, but this could be a quit watch spot for Arkansas. I think if you're State, you might be catching them at a good time. And again, I like State's offense's ability to put points on the board in this game. It's whether or not you can limit what they can do in the ground game enough to slow them down. If you can do that, then State's going to have a real chance to go into Fayetteville and step with a win. Last game we're going to talk about for the Bulldogs is the game against the Missouri Tigers. That'll be the November 15th. Sorry. So 1 week after they go to Fayetteville, they will go to Columbia to take on Mizzou. Is that right? Sorry. Yes. No. They have a game in between. Sorry. They have at Arkansas, Georgia at home, then at Missouri. So that is November 15th, but I had it wrong. So it's not the same week after. Another game for State. It's an interesting matchup when we talk about this opponent. So for Mizzou, they were not the same team they were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, this was genuinely a good football team. But they were also genuinely a good team that got away with a lot of turnover luck, had a lot of things go their favor in terms of the kicking game. And I think there was a lot of expectation for regression last year from Missouri. And they showed it. When you see how they performed against Alabama, when you see how they performed, was it Texas A&M who lit them up? I know I'm scratching back here. Yeah, they got blown out by Texas A&M. South Carolina was putting it on them, honestly, for a while. But they were lucky to beat Vanderbilt. They were lucky, and I know South Carolina to come back and win at the end of that game, but they were up. They were down big in that game. They were lucky to beat Auburn. They were lucky to beat Vanderbilt. They should not have been as good as they were, and they just kind of found a way to win a lot of these games because you had a lot of teams that were bad. The Mississippi State game, as I mentioned earlier at the start of this show, State had a chance to really step on their throats to start that game off, and they just wasted the opportunity, as State did so frequently last year, and it allowed Missouri to just kind of really just take control. The game could have gone differently, and you're kind of wondering, could it go differently this year in Columbia? So you talk about this Missouri team, they're losing a lot on offense. There's some interesting pieces there, though. Bo Perbula is probably going to be the guy for them at quarterback. They do have Sam Horn, who's been on the roster for a few years, but Perbula from Penn State, probably the guy. Good runner. Don't know much about his ability as a passer, although he hasn't, he was a highly touted player coming out of high school, so he does have that. But we don't know that he's a guy who's going to be stepping in and just be a real big-time player for them at the position. Can he be an upgrade over what Brady Cook was for them a year ago? Possibly, because Brady Cook didn't have a great season, but 2 years ago, Brady Cook was really nice for them at quarterback. So, I have questions about the position there. We do know they've got a good running back. Ahmad Hardy comes over from ULM. That's a guy State wanted out of the portal when they were looking for a running back. He had a huge season a year ago. Over 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns, 5.7 yards per carry. He is a really, really good player. He's a good scheme fit. Missouri likes to do that wide zone offense. Cole Kublik talks about this a lot. That's not a system that you just pick up quickly. That's a system that takes some time. He talked about this a lot when Mississippi State was making its shift to running more to that style of offense under Kevin Barbay, as I mentioned that name to haunt all of you right now. But Hardy played in that system. That's what ULM did. So he's got familiarity running that style of offense. Kevin Coleman comes over at receiver. Mississippi State fans know him well. I cannot sing Kevin Coleman's praises enough. I think he's one of the most talented receivers to ever come through Starkville. Just his ability to do everything from in all three phases. That's big for them, though, because they're losing a ton of receiver. Luther Burden at his position, gone. Theo Weiss, gone. Their number 3 guy as well, gone. So they're replacing a lot at receiver. They're replacing their running backs, but I think Ahmad Hardy steps in, and I think it's probably better than the guys they had. Can Kevin Coleman on his own step in and do what the other guys did at receiver? Probably not. So I kind of feel like the passing game here takes a little bit of a step back. From an offensive line standpoint, and Connor Tollison at center, Caden Green at guard are the 2 guys they have back, but they lost pretty much everyone else. Have a lot of transfers stepping in that I think they feel good about, but a lot of questions. And as I just talked about, they run this wide zone system. That's something that takes time. So how well does this group mold together? I do tend to think they'll probably be able to run it pretty well. I keep, Cole Kublik, I keep referencing him because he's sort of who I'm going to here to talk about this team. He likes their tight end, Brett Norfleet, a lot from what he can do from a blocker, from a blocking standpoint. They're probably going to be able to run the football pretty effectively, especially Perbula being a guy who can run it a little bit. That helps them out. And again, a team that's going to run the ball a lot and then throw play action to a guy like Kevin Coleman, you've got something on offense. I don't know, though, if they've got the ceiling that they've had in the previous seasons. Defensively, though, they may be pretty good, which means they may not need their offense to be all that great. They do lose a really good pass rusher in Johnny Walker, who last year had 9.5 sacks, was a second-team All-SEC guy. But you got a pair of starters back in defensive end Zion Young and defensive tackle Chris McClellan. Good players. Were pretty productive for them. A Georgia transfer and Damon Wilson is a guy that they're counting on and thinks is going to step in and be productive for them off the edge. This could be a solid or even good defensive line, and that will really kind of set the – I typically talk about defensive line setting the floor for a defense. This one probably sets the ceiling because the back 7 is really loaded. Tristan Newsom at linebacker was highly productive last year, and they had a transfer from West Virginia, Josiah Trotter, also very productive. So you got a really good linebacker duo there. Dalen Carnell at nickel, strong player. Toriana Pride and safety Morgan Burks are 2 guys who are starters in your secondary. You bring in Stephen Hall from Wazoo. That's a guy Mississippi State was interested in, and he's probably going to start here at Missouri. And then Jalen Catalon, still around, having gone from Arkansas, where he was All-SEC player in 2020, to then going to Texas, to going to UNLV, where he had a big year, and now he's back in the SEC at Mizzou. So a veteran safety on the back end. Maybe not a ton of star power. I know Catalon's a name that pretty much everyone knows. He's been around so long. I don't know if they have a lot of stars on the defense. A lot of guys you're talking about as like big-time players. But they got a lot of good players. And this is a good defense a year ago. If that defensive line ends up being strong for them, you're talking about potentially one of the better defenses in the country. And that's going to be the strength of this team. Like, they are going to be a good defensive football team. I know I'm not diving into a specific position here, but I just think defense as a whole should be good, if not really great. Weakness, offense overall. I know that's kind of blunt. The passing game, if I were to get specific, again, I love Kevin Coleman, but I've got doubts about quarterback. I've got doubts about the receiving core as a whole and stepping in. Probably going to be able to run the football decently well, but that offense as a whole, I've got some questions about what they're going to be able to do. From a matchup standpoint, even for a run-heavy offense, it's going to kind of buck the trend of what I've talked about for Mississippi State so far in terms of their matching up with these teams. I think State's defense could perform well enough here. Because, again, I don't think Missouri's going to be dominant up front along their offensive line. So even as a team that's going to run the ball and probably run the ball decently well, I don't know that State is just going to be in a position where they can't hold up. I think State's defensive front is improved enough that the Missouri offensive line is one where I say State could have a chance there. That said, what Missouri does from a defensive line standpoint is going to be, or from a defensive standpoint, is going to be a challenge for State. It's really good defense you're going up against on the road, and that's tough to deal with. You kind of have to hope that the defensive line ends up just being merely average, because if that's the case, then you could probably hold up enough to trust Jeff Lebby to scheme things up for you and get you some points on the board. But this feels like one, if you're State, you might be talking about having to try to win a slugfest to go on the road and get a win in Columbia. Although I think State on paper has the better offense. Maybe that alone is enough, but Missouri definitely from a defensive standpoint going to have the edge. Those are big games for MSU. When we talk about those road games and just the opportunities for you to find conference wins, those are some of your better chances. Again, Arkansas is a team that I'm not very high on this year. And I think with where that game falls in the schedule, with the concerns I have about Arkansas defensively, I could see State going to Fayetteville and having a nice day. Missouri, I kind of feel like defensively they're still going to be pretty good, but I have a feeling that that's a team that could be taking a step back. Now, Texas A&M I think is going to be really good. Florida has a high ceiling, but Florida's kind of very inconsistent and tough to peg down because of what we don't know in terms of their health. And again, I keep harping on that, but that's a real concern when we talk about the Gators. So those are games State, outside of A&M, I don't give them much of a chance. And then a healthy Florida. But those are games where I think State has an opportunity. And if we're talking about Jeff Lebby taking a nice step forward in year two, finding at least one conference win on the schedule, these are your opportunities. And I think if State's going to hit their goal for the season and taking a step forward, you're probably going to find a win out of this group. Maybe not. There are a couple home games that we can talk about as being chances, and we'll talk about those next week. But these are definitely some games that are going to be kind of important for them in terms of taking the next step forward. That's going to do it for me today. Again, we're kind of just rattling through here. We're just a couple weeks away now from kickoff. And now, look, we've got a full preview up for offense. We've got a full preview up for defense. We've done 2/3 of the schedule breakdown. So got a lot of great preview content out for you guys to be able to talk about the Bulldogs as we go into the 2025 season. Next week, we're going to make our final predictions. We're going to break down what it's doing from a home SEC game standpoint. Might flip our schedule around a little bit. Maybe next week we open up talking about the home conference games and try to do a big preview show for the season end of next week. Because, next week is our final week before game week. So 2 weeks from now, we're talking about Mississippi State taking on Southern Miss. So this is kind of our last opportunity to get in here and really break down the Bulldogs for the year. Again, if you haven't already, please leave us a like. If you could share the channel, really appreciate it. Subscribe if you're not already, and hit that thumbs up so you know every time we go live. It's been a ton of fun continuing to see this channel grow, and we want to keep this going as we get further into the season. So that'll do it for me today. Thanks for everybody for tuning in.